Buenas tardes a todos y muchas gracias por asistir a este webinar de SpyCloud. Soy Julio Marín, General Manager de En Persona 360 y de Secure Latam, División de Seguridad de En Persona 360. También me acompaña Carly Rangel, Directora Comercial de SpyCloud, quien hará la presentación. Durante la misma o al final pueden efectuar preguntas escritas en inglés o español a través del chat. Una vez terminada la presentación, les invito a visitar Secure Latam en www.securelatam.com y para cualquier consulta o solicitud de información pueden escribir a sales@enpersona360.com o a mi correo personal julio@enpersona360.com. Carly, go ahead. You have the control.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks for taking the time to join us, and I appreciate the welcome. I will have to say, of course, my 3 years of Spanish haven't quite prepared me for any questions in Spanish, so I'll be presenting this in English, but the team will take care of me with any that come our way. So what I'm going to talk today about, is really the focus of SpyCloud. We are an account takeover prevention service, and you can go to the next slide, give us a little definition there. So what account takeover is really the use of stolen credentials, typically from third-party websites, to get into sensitive accounts. These sensitive accounts typically can be corporate-owned accounts. These can be consumer accounts of yours, or generally just any other account in which a login credential is necessary. And so, what SpyCloud is in the business and out there to do is to go out and recover credentials specifically, but also about 150 other data points that have been stolen in third-party breaches. The idea being, think of LinkedIn back in the day. You have a breach such as that. Your employees or your customers are going out there creating logins for that, and maybe an employee is using a work credential, so a work email address, and one of their 5 passwords that they're rotating about on LinkedIn. That account gets breached, perhaps unbeknownst to you, unbeknownst to that employee, and now that login credential is in the hands of threat actors. It's in the hands of the criminals that are now trying to actively use it to get into other accounts. SpyCloud is on the forefront of going out there, gathering that information back, and then disseminating that to our customers. And we have a couple different use cases I'll get to in just a moment as to how we do that specifically. We can go to the next one. So to give you kind of an idea of the numbers we're working with, SpyCloud has just over 13,000 breaches in our data set. We've been operating since 2016. We emerged from stealth in June of 2017. So just in that period of time, that kind of gives you an idea of how rampant this issue has become. I know, you can't really be on the internet for long before you see a new breach that's occurring. And so we are constantly out there gathering new intel. With that, we have a total of 78 billion digital artifacts. I mentioned, this spans not only login credentials, we will also collect phone numbers, credit card information, geolocation, anything that we find that can be used to social engineer an employee or a customer of yours out of login information is going to be something important for SpyCloud to collect. So that's a large part of the data that we will gather. And with that, our focus again is going to be on those login credentials. And in order to do what we do, we need to crack passwords. Just giving you all the hashed password that came with that site isn't going to do you any good in the remediation process. And so we have a heavy emphasis on making this actionable. And to date, we have just above 18 billion plain text passwords within our data set. And there's some pretty cool ways in which we're able to utilize that as well that I'll get to in just a moment. All right, so why do we focus on login credentials? You can move to the next slide. Why do we focus on login credentials? We continue to find these as the leading attack vector. It's far too easy to utilize those stolen credentials to get into accounts these days. We have 2 different reports up here showing the use of stolen credentials being the #1 attack vector. And a good example there is the Dropbox breach that occurred a couple years ago. It was one employee that was using an old LinkedIn password that, as we know, was stolen long ago. He was using that old password threat actors had their hands on that password, got into his account, and then breached 60 million other people due to one bad password. And so that is going to be, really where we stand and where we focus. Move to the next. All right. And so in taking a look at what we see as an unfortunate daily occurrence, what we are seeing, if not daily, on a weekly basis these days, is again the idea of someone going out there, creating a login. We love to use fantasy football as an example, but just imagine just about any website. You go out, you create that login, and this can be an employee, or again, this can be a customer of yours. They get breached. That site gets breached unbeknownst to you, unbeknownst to them. And again, that credential is floating out there. And where it gets really scary is if that's the credential that they're using for an email account, a Gmail account, a corporate account, and so forth. What they can do with that credential, they can go in many different ways. Specifically, they can use that to get into the email and then email fellow employees. So say if they got into your CFO's account, they're using that credential to now email, fellow accounting personnel, or maybe even a new employee of yours, saying, "Hey, can you do this quick wire transfer? $100,000 to this customer. I need it ASAP." Well, that new employee trying to impress the CFO, not really understanding even the email style and format of that CFO just yet, is going to transfer that $100,000, quickly as the CFO told them to. They can use this to get into banking accounts, and drain those banking accounts after a few days, start to change passwords out, lock people out of their accounts. There's a number of ways in which login credentials aren't just used specifically for that account, but they can be used, sort of in a web to gather more intel on that person and maybe even get to a more significant account. And so that is again what we are trying to stop here. All right, on to the next. All right. And so how does SpyCloud do this? What do we focus on? We focus on early access to this data. And really where that comes is the focus on human intel versus automated means of collection. SpyCloud has a team of researchers that have gone out there. They are building personas, and they are interacting and interfacing with the same threat actors that are breaching these accounts. And through social engineering techniques, ego boosting techniques, we are able to get our hands on this data often 24 to 48 hours after it occurs. That is truly how you are able to be account takeover preventative, is early access to information. We don't wait on it to hit the dark web. We typically see that happen about 500 days after a breach occurs, when it hits, the notorious deep and dark web. We will deploy automated means to go out there and collect information. Oftentimes that's duplicates of what we already have. We'll throw away, about 90% of the data that we collect off the dark web. And so utilizing both of those methods comprise our data set. Second to that, automated curation. This is where we take that information, those raw data files, we internalize it, we crack passwords, we cleanse this information. So now we have it in an easy to read format for us to take to various use cases. That's all done internal before we provide that to our customers. And then lastly, through things like our Active Directory Guardian, which is, an automated tool of ours, you can then take this information and automate the remediation process. You're not going through hundreds of different records to see what passwords are still in use, what aren't in use. This Active Directory Guardian component is going to do that all in the back end for you. All right, we can go to the next. All right. So this kind of shows you, again, when we talk about how we get early access to information, really where we fall in this timeline. And you can go ahead and, just let that run through. The slide's going to show a few others, and then, we'll click twice. All right. So day 0, what we have is when a vulnerability is found in a website. Day 2, we have is when the breach occurs. So starting exactly when that breach occurs, account takeovers are going to begin. The guys who figured out how to get into those accounts, how to pilfer that data, they are now taking it and they are now testing it on various other accounts. Where can I find a match? Which accounts are reported to get into? This is when we say targeted attacks occur. So you have the guys that are high profiting, very smart because they figured out how to get into these accounts. And so they are now keeping it within their close-knit community. And so we have that single attacker that breached the site. We have that team of it, that small community, that team that are utilizing those credentials, and they may even share it with friends. Where SpyCloud sits is really among that team of attackers. So we will social engineer our way into these pockets, building up various personas to get into those various pockets of threat actors. And so during that time, the guys who stole this, they will often hold on to that information. They will retry out passwords knowing that 90-day password rotation policies are enforced, and that a lazy employee may go back to an old password that they had no idea had been breached. So there's going to be a period of time, and like we said, about 500 days is what we're seeing before they finally share it on the dark web. Then the public forums, the paste bins and such, that's where you would be able to pick it up from. And sometime after, we actually see them showing up on combo lists. And what that means is, you may see oftentimes, in the press, we found 90 million login credentials, 90 million passwords. There's no breach associated with that. What that means is it's the community sharing their passwords, sharing login credentials they found from many different sources. And at that point, they are just using it for their own unique credential stuffing tools, not caring really where that breach occurred, just caring about the email and password combinations to get into those accounts. All right, you can move forward. All right, so in mentioning what we are seeing is yeah, we can keep it here. That works. So targeted attacks occur early on. What are targeted attacks? This is where, again, they are able to get into the wealthy individuals, typically the C-level staff, the development department, due to the internal access to admin accounts. They want to get into the type of accounts that they know are high profiting, have a lot of sensitive information on your employees or your customers. And so that is going to happen early on in this life cycle, early on in these stages, because at that point, they know that no one has any idea, for the most part, that those credentials are stolen. And so they're able to use various social engineering techniques, bypass 2FA, and really be able to work that data. So that is, again, a reason why we want to focus on that early on segment. Whereas 90% of untargeted attacks do occur later on. They do occur with credential stuffing tools. That's where you're just seeing, those spray approaches where they're seeing what kind of passwords can I use to get into these accounts. And so you can move on to that next slide. With those 10% of targeted attacks, that accounts for about 80% of profit loss by a company. 80% of money that they are spending on the remediation side of it, whereas 90% of untargeted attacks accrue for 20% of that loss. And so coupled together, those are both going to be focuses of SpyCloud, but of course, we're really looking and paying attention to that 80% of loss early on in the life cycle. All right, we can go to the next. All right, and so this gives you, again, an idea of what we're doing on the back end once we gather this intel. We're parsing it, we're normalizing it, deduplicating, and specifically decrypting those passwords. And that's where that 18 billion plaintext password comes into play. And then enriching this data. So we'll add more information on the source of the information, and we'll also add job titles, job levels, anything to give you something easier to prioritize the list when you are walking through the SpyCloud portal and being able to figure out, do we have C-level staff? Do I have directors that I may want to prioritize as I'm moving through this list? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So I've been talking a lot about, our use case number 1 and our use case number 2. So employee account takeover prevention, this is going to be our most common use case. This is the protection of corporate accounts. This is ensuring that employees of yours aren't using those same login credentials elsewhere, essentially. So the same login credentials they are using for any corporate accounts, those haven't been found, on the underground in the dark web and such. With that, we do have an Active Directory Guardian component. Our consumer ATO prevention, this is now taking that same data, and now we're looking at your external facing accounts. So if you are a financial institution, if you are retail, e-commerce, anything that has consumer accounts, you would make use of this specific API we've supplied, to where you can check those login credentials and see if that consumer is using an email and a password combination that's been compromised on that account. And so specifically there, I lost actually my train of thought for that one, but specifically there, we are looking to make sure that they are not using any compromised credentials. There we go. And so if there is loyalty points, or any kind of financial credit card information associated with that account, that's going to be high for the taking. And it may be on you and your team to ensure that you are, paying back any money or any financial loss that came from that customer. For this specific API, we want to make sure that you have something in place to make sure it is that actual customer. It is not, a threat actor trying to get into that account. All right, third-party insight. This is one of our latest products, and this is where we are taking all of the data that we have acquired so far within our data set, and using that for you to check against any vendors, any close partners of yours that have login access or that are sending you emails, files on the regular. This is now going to give them a risk score, and if we see that if you see that they have a medium or a high risk, you can then give them a remediation path to move forward with that. And then our fraud investigations. This is really taking that same data set, and it's our way of using it to expose criminals. And so just as we are all leaving online breadcrumbs, everywhere on the internet, every time we set a password or an email address anywhere, so are the threat actors. And for this particular use case, we are now using the same breached data that they're stealing, and we are figuring out, uncovering alternate personas, and BEC fraud and such, to figure out who these threat actors are and hopefully make an arrest with it. All right, so I just have one last tool that I want to cover on this webinar before we give a demo of the portal account. So this is the Active Directory Guardian component. And again, this is specific to that use case number one, the employee ATO use case. And so what you'll see here is, exposed corporate credentials, username matches, and exposed AD accounts. Those probably don't mean much to you now, but the way this tool works is everything that we have within our portal, is through the cloud, and now you have an online portal account in which you'd access that. This now takes all of that data associated with your company domain, your company email addresses, and it brings it on-prem. We work with both local AD and Azure AD. And so how the scan will work, and you can actually move to the next slide too. How the scan will work is we want to first check against the exact match credentials, the exact email and passwords that your employees are using and that have been compromised out there. And so you would be able to run this on the back end and see, say John Smith, see if John Smith is using that same password we found in the LinkedIn breach. Is that what he's using currently? A couple other things that we can add to that would be checking for banned passwords. And so now we want to add in the blacklisted passwords. So the name of your company, CEO name, product name, any of those names that are commonly used by employees, you can go ahead and add this to your own unique list. And we will populate this already with the passwords that we've seen commonly used. So password 1, 2, 3, and so forth will already be added to this list. We will check for fuzzy matches. So now any type of password variant, so adding an exclamation point or a couple symbols after the same password, we're going to go through the rotation and already check for all of those. And then checking against all compromised passwords. And so this is really falling under those NIST compliance guidelines to ensure that, going back to the John Smith example, not only is he not using a previous password of his, but he's not using a password that has ever been found or ever been compromised in our entire data set. And that is where we're taking those 18 billion passwords and we're going to check to make sure that John Smith isn't using any one of those. All right, you can move on to the next. And so this report really goes into, where we see the password match. And so if you were to look at the status, you could see we have password only, we have banned passwords. So you as the admin on this account can now, take a granular look and see, all right, John, why were you flagged when the AD scan was run? Was it because you're using an exact password, you're using one of our banned passwords? And if I was able to, I could actually click into the status and read where that came from, any more information that was tied to that specific breach. We also allow you to automate this. So you're looking here at more of a manual process where we would force the password reset for each employee. As the automated process, you would be able to set this and again, forget it. And so, we typically recommend running it on a weekly scan as we do weekly ingest of new data. And that way you can make sure you're staying on top of anything new that's come about. All right, and I believe that may be the end of what I have here on the slideshow. All right, so now we're going to see if I'm able to bring my screen up. Do we have any questions while we're working through that?
Les dejamos unos minutos por si tienen que hacer alguna consulta a través del chat.
Are we able to see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. So what I have here is what you would view from the SpyCloud portal account. And so in taking a look at this real quick, I'll just show you a few different things. So we have a breach exposure timeline. We have breach assets. And the same timeline running down here. And all of this information is populated based upon a couple different watch list events I've added. One being the domain name. So example.org, that's a dummy domain that we use for any type of demo purposes. You can also add personal email addresses. This is highly recommended for any non-work emails if you want to add executive staffs, say Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo accounts. And then external facing IP addresses. And so these often get included in breaches as well. And so, if an employee were logging on to a site that was, breached at some point, and then an employee was still using a personal email address, they weren't using work credentials, it would still be picked up because you would be putting in your public facing IP for your various offices and headquarters. And so you could also see those breaches collected in this watch list. All right, so looking through here, I can scroll over any one of these data points. I can read a little bit more on the breach. I can see whether it was publicly collected or privately collected. And then I can actually look at the records associated with that. I can also look at the same data here, but specifically I just want to get to one data point. So sensitive source. In our collection method, there will be times in which we are collecting this information prior to a company or an organization knowing that they have been breached. During that time, SpyCloud goes through a responsible disclosure process. We do provide that information back to the company. We also work with law enforcement to track down that criminal. So there are times where we will mask certain breaches as sensitive sources while still ingesting the data that you need to remediate the problem. So you will see the email, passwords, and any other PII that was collected in that breach, but you may see it as a sensitive source there for a couple of months until we are unable to unmask it. Reason number two is there are controversial sites that we will select. And so, there may be a means for us to also mask an unsafe work site. Okay. And then taking a look, these are high level look at a couple asset types that we will collect. I'm going to specifically go into example.org. And so, if this were your organization's domain, this is the type of data that you would be able to see. So looking at the records here, quickly we'll look through and see the types of breaches that we have collected over the past couple of, weeks and months, our ingest date, the breach date, your employees' email addresses. And then if I want to go line by line, I can see passwords, so it can actually click into each one of these. Again, this is dummy data, so I'm not showing you any real passwords. This has all just been, either populated by SpyCloud, or this is what people have used on dummy websites out there. We can also see severity here, and so we have informational, critical, and high. And so high meaning we have a plain text password, informational meaning that's still in its hashed form there. All right. And then both infected employee records and infected consumer records. So something else we will do is collect botnet information. And when we collect botnet information, we will often parse it into two different fields. If we find an email address that is associated or connected with the domain that you have added, so your organization's domain, and we will obviously group it under those employee records. And so here we have different botnets that we've recently ingested. We have those employee email addresses, passwords, what website they were trying to log into. And then we actually can go through and see what that infected path looks like, the IP address that was picked up, and specifically the email and password. And so now you can take this information to see if there is any internal computers that may have malware on their machine. And at that point, we market this as a critical severity rating because it's long past just changing out a password. The machine needs to be cleansed. Infected consumer records. Same idea here. This is just going to be for any external users logging on to your company's website. So if you have a portal account that they're logging into, we'll take a look at the path that was used. And so we have here, username and password, and then we have their IP address, their infected user path. So now you would be able to flag any external accounts of yours if you do see malware on their machine. Let them know, and then once that's removed, they can gain access back to that account. All right. So among others, like I said, we have the third-party insight. This is going to be something new for us. And so I can show you here what that would look like for you on your dashboard if you were to enable this. And again, this is going into managing the risk and exposure of any partners of yours, of any vendors of yours. So when I take a look at the dashboard here, we can see that this is already pre-populated, for demo purposes. So we have high-risk partners, medium-risk partners, and low-risk partners. I can see who all increase their risks. So as SpyCloud is ingesting new data, what kind of partners or which partners are getting, more information, more breaches out there, more data out there, and then decreasing that risk. So taking a look at who has actually followed the steps to remediate this problem. And so, like I said, this is kind of just populated with a few partner names that we have here. So we can see the different areas that SpyCloud focuses on. We look at plain text credentials, how many passwords we have in plain text. C-level staff, so obviously they're executives. This goes back to those infected employees. So do we see any internal infected employees at that organization? Combo list collisions. So this is how many times we've seen those email and passwords floating about on the dark web. And again, being combined into a bunch of combo lists, meaning they're heavily out there and they're heavily exposed. And then password reuse index. So we utilize a citing count, which tells me how many times I've seen that email and password combination in various breaches. We utilize that citing count to tell us also how often that password is being reused by employees. Obviously, if there is a high password index, those employees are continuing to reuse any passwords that may be included in breached sites. All right. Team, I want to stop there and see if there's any questions or any direction we want to go in. Give us some time for that. Hello, can everyone still hear me?
Yes, no, we hear you.
Okay, so I was going to say, do we have any? Do we want to take any questions at this point?
We got two questions.
Okay.
What applications do you integrate with?
Okay. So we integrate in with Alien Vault, Eclectic IQ, and Splunk currently.
And someone's asking about installation or deployment.
Is this for Active Directory?
I think the question is just installation. This is a SaaS model, right?
Yes, correct. So this is a SaaS model. To get started, you would be able to go on to SpyCloud.com, put in your email address, and then check your exposure. That would allow you into a free trial account. And from there, we could upgrade it depending on which subscription you would like to purchase. Or you can get in contact with us, and then we would create one of these portal accounts from you. And depending upon whether you're looking at the employee services, and so, meaning you'd really be working from this portal account. And if you did decide to purchase Active Directory Guardian, we would enable that software download directly from your portal account. So you'll see that here instead of contact sales. That would be a download button. And then we would enable an API key for the installation. If you wanted the consumer ATO prevention, we have a specific API that we would enable in a portal account just like this. For that third-party insight, that would all be enabled on the portal account. And then fraud investigations, that again would be another API key that we would enable within this portal account.
There's another question about, do you keep this information? I don't know what that means.
So we do maintain the information within a secure data set. We do, if there is any customer of ours that asks us to remove them from a portal account, from any mailing list, we will remove them, their information from that portal account. But in terms of the data that we have here, we do keep all of that internal. This is collected from public places. This has already been breached, and so that's the kind of information that we will store.
Carly, thank you very much for helping us with the webinar. Muchas gracias a todos por su participación. Como les indicaba al comienzo, cualquier cosa que necesiten pueden escribirnos a sales@enpersona360.com o a mi correo personal julio@enpersona360.com. De la misma forma que podemos conversar para hacerles una demo o probar el producto. Adicionalmente, les estaremos enviando una grabación del webinar por email. Saludos a todos y buen día.